Well, hello and welcome to Alpha Transform and Transform Tuesday. I'm Dave McCormick, VP of Products and Services here at Alpha Software, and I'm joined today by Greg Bowling, who's going to be giving a really kind of cool presentation. But before we get started, there are a few things I want to get squared away. First of all, Greg, if you're on the line, let me just take you off mute real quick. Can you confirm that you can see my screen?
I can, yes.
You can. Oh, great. And you're off mute. Superb. Before we begin, I think what I'm going to talk a little bit about what Greg is going to be showing. He's going to be showing off how to do charting in the TransForm filler application using this very clever technique. It's something that I just saw for the first time yesterday. I was just going back by his office and he's like, Dave, check this out. And so it's something that I'm sure you guys are really going to be interested in. The other thing I want to let you know is that the user's guide, the Alpha Transform user's guide, has been updated. I sent out a link last week, but there's yet one more revision, so I have pasted the link to that in the chat window of the GoToWebinar control panel. So if you want to click on that and get the PDF, there it is. And I wanted to go over one small portion of that today. And let me just jump down to, actually jump into that document. And it has to do with the on-device assets. So let me see if I have that open. I think I do, right. So on-device assets, we get a lot of questions, first of all, about how to load them on, but also how to refer to the assets in TPL code or in image tags or in fields and if expressions and so on in TransForm. And the problem that some people run into is that while they do load the assets fine onto the device, they don't realize that some assets need to be whitelisted so that they can be used in the application. And specifically, the ones that require whitelisting are the image tags. So let's say in your HTML, you wanted to refer to an image, whether that image was maybe locally stored on the phone as one of the on-device assets, or even a non-on-device asset, something maybe up on a web server. The way you do that is actually in the on-device assets section of TransForm. Let me just jump over to that. And here we are in TransForm Central. I'm on the Home tab, and I'm here under Define On-Device Assets. So this box down here, and just in case you didn't realize that, it does show up about this size, but you can resize this box. So this box down here is where you put in various policies about when items get downloaded and so forth. But one of the sections here is called path prefixes. And so I'm going to jump back to my example, here. And for a URL, basically you just give the path prefix a name value pairing. So in this case, it's my site, and then you give it the URL for my site. And then later on, when you want to refer to that, you just say, in your image tag that is, you just say image source equals my site dot. And what it will do is it will actually replace this section here. It'll take that out and replace that section there so that your image displays properly. For an on-device asset, you need to preface the folder in which it's going to be stored, the subfolder, with a hashtag. This basically tells TransForm that it's going to be a local folder and not something that you are not a URL. That hashtag, though, does not appear when you refer to it in the on-device asset. You refer to it the same way. So, for example, I have a name value pairing of images, and I've specified products as the subdirectory on that device. If I look down here, I'll see that the source is set to images dot, like we did before. And again, that images dot will be replaced with, in this case, product slash. There won't be the hashtag there. So that's there. That's in the book currently on page 160. Take a look at that if you are playing around with images. The other thing that we have for whitelisting are for AJAX callbacks. Now these are actually not required. If you do not specify any policy for AJAX callbacks, we just assume that any AJAX callback URL will be allowed, which we have here in a little note. But otherwise, you can in fact whitelist this, and that's actually a really good idea because it'll help you keep track of where all of your URLs are. It means that you'd be able to change them all in one place, and it also means that you won't make a mistake and accidentally make an AJAX callback, possibly passing sensitive data or something like that to a URL you did not intend to pass it to. So that's my little brief thing on on-device assets and on the new user's guide. But now we're going to jump over and see something really pretty cool. So, Greg, are you ready to present?
Yes, I am.
Excellent. Let me go ahead and make you the presenter. Okay. And I'll let you know when, and you should see a dialog box for you to share your screen there.
Yep.
Oh, and there it is.
All right. Excellent. So I want to preface this by where this idea came from.
Okay.
You'll remember that in TransForm commands, there's an HTML block that has a restricted set of HTML commands that you're allowed to put in there. One of those restricted set is SVG, which, if you're not familiar with it, is a way to draw primitives, and it's what the icons, for example, are developed in for your forms. And so I thought, well, if I can put SVG in an HTML block, I can probably then also create TPL code that spits out a SVG, which then I could display. And from there, the idea was, well, it'd be great if I could do some charts in TPL. So what I've done, just to show you real quickly, is created some basic, types of charts. So here's like a gauge that you can drive based on the value that you have in a field. And if we go.
And by the way, this might look a little pixelated in GoToWebinar, but in real life, it looks fantastic. It looks really good.
So like 89% here shows. So I've got three different gauges here. One's just a simple color gauge, right? All the way, the percentage across in blue. Mm-hmm. One is a sort of a heat map type of gauge that, the farther it goes, the more green it'll get. And then another is one with a needle pointing to where on the gauge it is. And then something that Dave hasn't seen yet that I've been working on is, if we can do gauges, then we can certainly do pie charts, right?
Fantastic.
So, and then we can make those pie charts driven by some data here. We could say this is 5. And the color I want is, let's say, yellow. And the label is going to be bananas. All right. And so now we've added a bananas segment to our pie chart. So, and this is a little bit of work in progress, but the idea here is that I should be able to do some basic pie charts, line graphs, bar charts, other sorts of things using that technique. Now, I think, Dave, you wanted me to kind of go through the code a little bit.
Yeah, so. Definitely. I don't think this audience is not scared of taking a look at code.
Okay.
So, well, I hope not. We are taking a look at some TPL code. And in the future, I mean, if we think that charts are something you're going to want to have in your mobile applications, then it might, we may make a much easier way of doing this. But let's look at the hard way.
Yep. Yeah. So I know that Dan has told me not to do too much on this because there is some more advanced charting coming in the roadmap, but I'm impatient. So so what I've done is created some TPL to do some basic things here. So for example, this is the function that is in, actually, if I flip over to the form commands here. I actually did click the button.
Oh, wow. I hope we're not linked up to Google Calendar, man.
Yeah. Well, all right, we won't look at that. Who cares?
Wait a minute, that's not good. All right, okay. You explain the code, and I'll see what's going on.
Yeah. So all I have in the app itself is actually look at it, right?
You should be able to get there now. I mean, it looks like it's definitely working for me on my side. If you want to show it
Yeah,
to
I think I just broke it. But
Oh, okay.
yeah, there we go. Just, this is why I preloaded everything and had it all ready to go, and then it broke on me, right? So
Yeah.
that's typical. Anyway, I don't have to wait for this.
All right.
All I have is an HTML block where I am calling using the curly bracket syntax some of these functions that I have sort of at a top level. So that first gauge we saw, the blue one, is a function called gauge simple. And really what it does is I build a string of SVG and then eventually return that from my function. And then that actually gets rendered in the HTML block when you do that. So I've built a helper function that gives me the starting SVG, syntax, because that's the same every time. And then in this case, I've got two components to it, right? So I have a function to draw that first arc, and I specify basically everything I've done with the circle charts is based on percentage around the arc. So we're starting at a 0%, and we're going to basically the percentage field that I have in that control, and then I draw that in blue, and then I draw another arc starting from that percentage all the way to the end, 100%, and I draw that in light gray, and then I add a label, which is basically I'm just taking that decimal representation of a percent, multiplying by 100, adding a percent sign to the end, and I stick it. I have a function that basically places that in the middle under the arc. So the heat map gauge, it basically does the same thing in that, it says, hey, there's percentage that I need to draw. And then in this case, instead of just drawing the arc, the blue one all the way to the percent, there's actually a bunch of if statements that says, if I'm 20%, if I'm over 20%, that's a full red segment. If I'm over, if I'm over 40%, then I draw a full segment of the next color, essentially until I get to the value I'm at, and then I draw in that color, basically the partial segment, and then I fill the rest in with the light gray. And then the needle chart is kind of the same thing in that the first thing I actually do is just draw the whole arc 100%, right, which does all the 5 colors, because I want that to show all the time. And then I create basically a dot in the middle for my needle, and then I have a function that draws the needle, which is just a line basically out to the value. So that's kind of how that one works.
Excellent.
And the pie charts are similar in that there we go. This is basically the one that I built to drive the data-driven one. My process is always kind of, the first thing I did was mock up some SVG to make a pie chart, and then just dumped it in an HTML block to see that it rendered okay. And then from there, I tried to replicate that same one, just using some of the functions that I built up. And then finally, I tie it to like data to make it actually data-driven. But really what we're doing here is we have a data group that has basically the value, the color, and the legend text that I want. And so what I loop through here and put those into separate arrays to keep track of that. Then the main component of drawing the actual pie chart is I have a pie segment where I say start at 0, go to 30%, and then make it this color. I have a function that actually puts the label on, which is like the value that's sitting out to the side. It actually just pushes that out and puts the text there. And then one to draw the actual legend, which is kind of based on the order they're in, so it can go down the list. So I'm sure there's many ways to break it. In fact, I do have one change I need to make to the pie chart to make sure that for segments that are greater than 50% of the whole circle, there's a slightly different SVG syntax you have to tell it to make the arc go all the way around.
Okay.
But
so
I've got
speaking
that there. So.
Speaking of SVG, how did you learn this SVG? I'm looking at this and I'm like, what? I mean, I've looked at SVG on the inside before, but what was your go-to resource for studying? And do you have a website or something?
There's a W3 Schools page that gives you the very basics. So, and what I can actually do is, let me drag over. This is just an HTML page that I use for mucking around.
Oh, okay.
And then here's essentially the results of it, right?
Yeah.
So what I've done is I play around with different different options to get something that I look. So if we look at the pie chart, for example, the first thing I did is, okay, can I get a circle with the segments where I want them? And then I messed around with the labeling, and now this is where I'm playing around with segments that are greater than half the circle to figure out when I first put some data in there. When you have like two items and one's like 80% of the circle, it actually draws like a shorter loop or something the way I have it right now.
Okay, yeah, gotcha.
So it looks really weird until you get enough data in there so that the segments are all smaller than half the circle.
Yeah, that totally makes sense.
Yeah, so what I was doing, really the main command that you kind of work with is the path command. So and I can let me find the pie chart one in here real quick. Oops. This is, I think, a good one, right? This has all the labels and everything. Okay. Yeah, so what a path does is, or how this whole thing works is, you can specify absolute coordinates kind of on a grid for where these paths go. So you can do it relatively as well. So go 10 forward and then go 11 the next direction and things like that.
Sure.
But the easiest thing for me with dealing with these circles is to basically say, start at the center, go 100 units out this way, draw an arc to this point, and then draw a line back to this point. So really, I need to just know these 3 points and the arc radius in order to, and the direction it's going, because that's what breaks the other thing.
Oh, gotcha.
And that lets me basically define that shape. I can draw a path from here to here to here to here, and it'll fill it in with the color I tell it to do. These are a little more complicated in that I have basically a path. I go like here to here, an arc to here, here, and then a reverse arc back to there. But it's basically the same idea. So
we have a request, and this may totally break GoToWebinar, but that's worth a shot.
Sure.
Can we just take that source code there and paste it into the chat window for people who want to paste it into a text editor and play with it themselves?
I suppose we could.
Let's see if it completely blows up with all this code. It'll be fun.
Yeah, not this one, but this one. All right. Chat window.
Yep.
I think it limits me to the amount.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. It doesn't let me paste the whole thing in there. So.
All right. Well, for those of you interested, send an email off to tfservice@alphasoftware.com, and we will get a copy of this over to you.
Yeah, my long-term plan is to clean this up into some basically library functions that we can provide, and then you'll be able to essentially specify, I want to draw a pie chart, or I want to draw a gauge or a line graph or something, and then give you the functions that can do that. But that's essentially kind of how we're doing it. Now, I guess the critical point of that for these arcs is there's basically trigonometry to determine where on that point plane you need to be. And if I find some functions here to do that, so I have essentially
see, after
functions.
high school, I thought I'd never have to use that again.
Yes. So basically, there's a way to find the XY coordinate of a point on a circle. If we know where it starts and the radius and things like that. So what I have are some functions. These are the earlier ones, that are just for the gauge stuff, and then I kind of generalized it. One thing I will note, if you haven't figured this out yet, and a fix is coming, args actually returns the arguments in the wrong order. So when that fix goes in the next release, then it'll go back to normal. I'm going to have to change all of this back around. But
Gotcha.
For now, the first argument is the last one in the list.
I see.
For reasons. But that's actually fixed in the next release. We've already got the fix sitting there waiting to go. So.
Oh, all right.
And then the other thing that drives this a little bit is that I've set up a global variable that has some of the common things that I need to know in order to fit essentially the chart onto the view box that you have, right? So if I can do it from this one.
Now the caret in front of your charts.py legend in TPL speak, that makes it a global variable. A global variable.
Yes.
Yep.
So what I have is and I do this in the onload. I run this function, but this also lets me run it in the debugger to set all my global variables.
Oh, okay. Cool.
And then that way, that is basically available to all the other functions and everything else that I'm trying to do. So this tells me that
does this also run in the tester or not?
It sort of does. In that if you build a function like my first test, actually, let's go up to the top here.
Right. I mean, they have to have something that triggers it.
Yeah. So this one has no actual arguments, right? So my first one, I just put some hard-coded data in there in order to make it come out the way I want. And so I can, after I run my initialization function there, you can run this in the tester, and it will obviously go through, and what we're building is this SVG string. So as it goes through all the bits and pieces, you'll be able to see what comes out of it. So I actually, assuming this came back, I think I could actually do that if you would like.
Oh yeah, cool.
I'm 90% sure I clicked the button. I think it's the go to webinar.
I think you're right too.
Screwing me up here.
Because
I think it's my
on my side, and I'm not broadcasting my screen. I can click whatever I want. So yeah.
Yeah, it's my poor little laptop. But see if I can get into the tester here real quick.
Yeah, that's. I think that's all right that we kind of get. I think we kind of get that. So wow, Greg, this is really amazing. Do we have any questions about the stuff that Greg has done here, or any other questions? It appears not. If you want a copy of Greg's code, just send an email off to tfservice@alphasoftware.com, and we will get it to you. Greg, thank you very much for presenting. And by the way, I dragged Greg in on very short notice. He said, I'm still in the middle of working on it. I'm like, can you present today? People really need to. But thanks.
Yeah,
turning out really well.
I said, I want to work on some less round charts, so some bar charts and line graphs and things like that as well. To try to give just a real basic set of charting, because I think actually, my very first cut at this stuff is an app that's in the sample apps,
Mhm.
and it's the 5S audit. And in this case,
right.
I've drawn a meter chart, right? So in this particular app, what I'm doing is scoring up some of these criteria. So if I go into one of these, the fewer problems you have, the higher score you get, right? So if I take some of these out here, then it changes. You know, I'm now like 72% 5S compliant, I guess. Where you can go in and say, oh, I got millions of problems, and my score will go down. So I've got like a 0 score on this whole category, right?
Gotcha.
I did hit the back button. Yeah, it just does not like me today. There we go. So now we're like 54%.
Oh, gotcha.
Right?
Yeah.
So that is available in the sample apps. So you'll be able to see all the TPL behind that. It's a little bit hard coded to this particular app, but I think you can get an idea of what's going on pretty easily. I tried to comment it.
And that's so sorry. That's currently in the list of sample templates in.
Yes, it's actually in the it's in the sample templates. So
wonderful. Hey, that's really cool. Hey, one last question. What is the code editor that you are using? And if I recall,
so I'm using.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. I'm using the Vim text editor, which is a updated version of the old VI text editor, because that's what I kind of grew up using. And I still use the HJKL keys to navigate and things like that. So what I have done is I built a little syntax highlighting file for Vim that does highlight TPL code for me. So that it still needs a little work too. It doesn't handle when you have to escape all the quotes. That's the biggest annoyance, I think, in doing this. Here you can see, you know, this is the function that draws the legend, so the little square with the color in it, and then the label. So here's a rectangle, and each parameter in a rectangle has quoted, you know, attributes.
Yep.
You can see it.
You
can see it here, right? So here's a rectangle, and you have to put all these quotes around everything. So that's probably one of the biggest annoyances, that and misspelling gauge every time and having my functions not work. But
that's a tricky one, that actually.
That is a tricky one. And it's a tricky one to notice that you've misspelled it.
It is. It's like, oh, the U is on the wrong side of the G again.
Yeah.
How did that happen? Yeah.
Yeah. Why is my code not working? Oh, it's because I can't spell. So
yeah.
Yeah. So yeah. But you know, I think, you know, my objective on this is, you know, with TPL, TransForm has become more than just doing forms. It's more like small applications at this point. So with client-side logic in TPL, I can do charting while I'm offline. And so as people fill out the forms, we can give visual indicators of what's going on and information displays. And there's all kinds of things that you can do with that. So I thought it was kind of a neat little demonstration of you know, some of the things. Plus, it makes pretty screenshots.
It definitely does. Add some color. Exactly. Right. Hey, well, thank you again. Actually, we've come to the end of our time. Thanks everyone who attended. There's folks who asked questions. If you do have any other questions, please send them to tfservice@alphasoftware.com. Hope to see you all at next week's TransForm Tuesday. Take care and goodbye.